Tariq Nasheed is an agent of chaos, an idiot and a narcissist. His latest propaganda documentary, Mic Check, exposes his attempt of drowning Black America in a sea of ignorance and using tribalism to profit from this by selling useless trinkets. This is not the first time he has tried to divide Black people for his paymasters, and it certainly won't be the last. Here we shall expose how and why he is blatantly lying, misrepresenting and bastardizing Black music history. Black music in America is one of the easiest ways to show that our ancestors came from Africa. Their music traditions survived the Middle Passage and were refined in the American South. Along the process, there were numerous contributions from other regions of the African diaspora. Anyone who denies the overwhelming amount of Africanism in Black music is either a trained idiot or a compulsive liar. No musicologist worth their weight in salt will deny this. Hip-hop as a singular music genre is African because all of its direct ancestors were African. The Black creators of hip-hop are children of Africa. They are the direct descendants of Africa. Before we begin, it is important to understand the nature of the intercolonial trade in the Americas, as well as the immigration of free Black people to the United States. Neymata Blyden discusses these contributions to the ethnogenesis of African Americans. There was never a period of history when Black America was completely homogeneous. Thus, fact is reflected in the diversity of our music traditions. Joseph Holloway, in his text Africanisms in North America, lists the music traditions of West and Central Africa as the foundation of Black American music. He specifically cites style of delivery, sound quality, mechanics of delivery. The style of delivery encompasses how performers employ body movements, facial expressions, and clothing within the performance context. All of these dimensions of African American music have African origins. Some examples of this are the ring shout, vibrant clothing worn in worship ceremonies, bellowing expressions used while singing. The sound quality served to translate everyday experiences into living sound. African voices adapt themselves to their musical contexts. Sounds are produced via a variety of unique techniques. Alternation of lyrical, percussive and raspy timbres, juxtaposing vocal and instrumental textures, changing pitch and dynamic levels, alternating straight and vibrato tones, weaving moans, shouts, grunts, hollers and screams into the melody. Instrumental sounds mimic human voice. These are accomplished by varying timbre, range, texture and shading. They create these sounds by altering traditional embouches, playing techniques, altering fingerings, and distorting devices. Improvisational and ornamentation is another prominent element of African music. This is expanding lengths of notes at climatic points, repetition of words and phrases, adding vocal or instrumental cadenzas. The density of textures can be increased by gradually adding layers of hand claps, instrumental accompaniment, and/or solo voices in a call and response structure. Call and response is a key African mechanism that allows for the manipulation of time, text, and pitch. The call and response structure is used by jazz musicians to establish a base for musical change and rhythmic tension. Rhythmic complexity is another prominent African feature in African American music. Rhythm is organized in multilinear forms. Different patterns are assigned to various instruments to produce polyrhythms, which enhance the intensity of music importance. Some more prominent African elements of African American music are syncopation, or music played around the beat instead of on it, also known as off rhythms, offbeat phrasing of melodic accents, cross rhythms such as the hemiola, complex rhythms and metronome sense, medicinal practices and worship ceremonies, and maintaining a connection to our roots, overlapping call and response patterns, dominance of percussion, hot elements where each instrument contains their own time signature. Voice as a hot element gave a connection to God in the spiritual. When it comes to the genres of African American music, All roads lead to the work and worship songs created by our ancestors during chattel slavery from the 16th or 19th century. This led to the creation of blues in the mid-1800s. Some prominent African elements of blues are Hausa bent or pitch style, which features instabilities within a pentatonic framework and a declamatory voice. 4 beats in 4 bars that could be repeated, bent, broken, or ignored. An ancient West Central Sudanic stratum of pentatonic song composition, often associated with simple work rhythms in a regular meter, but with notable offbeat accents, can be found among the Tikar of Cameroon. Melisma, or the singing of a single syllable of text, while moving between several different notes in succession. Some instrumental predecessors that reveal the clear African origins of the blues are the Kora of Mali, the Akonting among the Jola of Senegal, djembe drum, which accompanied field hollers in the south. Work songs, protest songs, and dance music are major elements of African music that were brought to the Americas. Though this music was often linked to spiritual conceptions, the secular variant of this music led to the creation of jazz. Jazz pulls from a variety of sources and shows the ethnic diversity of Black America. The Ojos Criollos, dance Cuban, or Afro-Cuban dance that came from habanera rhythms, was a foundational element of jazz. The adoption of this rhythm by early jazz musicians is indicative of an Afro-Cuban presence in the American South. This rhythm was later incorporated and refined by Scott Joplin. W.C. Handy, 1873 to 1958, a popular blues composer from Tennessee, incorporated habanera after a Cuban tour with Mahara's minstrels, creating a demand for similar sounds across the U.S. The rhythm of Black music in America also reveals the influence of Haitian migrants in the 19th century, as well as the Yoruba ancestry of many African Americans. We can see this in Juba, which is a form of body rhythm. The ring shout dance, which is found across the continent from Senegal to Congo, also played a prominent role in the development of Gula Geechee music traditions. Another prominent contribution to blues music comes from Afro-Mexicans, who have a history that goes back to the 16th century. These Black Mexicans migrated to the American Southwest in the 19th century and made numerous contributions to the development of both jazz. This can be seen in the late 1800s and early 1900s in New Orleans, through groups like La Orquesta Típica Mexicana and the Mexican Artistic Quintet, Narvaez writes, musicians like pianist and composer Jelly Roll Morton and his future bandmate Lorenzo Tio Jr., a Creole clarinetist who also had Mexican roots, also combined those influences. The development of rock and roll from R&B gives us insight on the dynamics of Black America in the early 20th century. The habanera rhythm from Afro-Cuban musicians can be found in most of the early rock hits. The habanera can frequently be heard in the pianist's left hand or played on the string bass and saxophone. It was used as a repeated rhythmic motif for the saxophone section, as in Bill Haley's 1954 version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll, or in a more relaxed manner, as in Fats Domino's 1955 recording of Blue Monday. Another instance where the habanera was used is Little Richard's Slippin' and Slidin' in March 1956. The band's saxophone section uses a full 8-note swinging habanera pattern. The bass plays a syncopated habanera variation. The background music to Little Richard's vocal is Afro-Cuban. Funk music is another genre that reveals the heavy influence of both Haitian and Afro-Cuban ancestry among African Americans. With the rise of these Caribbean immigrants to the United States, the fusion of these unique diasporic sounds in the 1940s led to the creation of funk. New Orleans musicians were especially receptive to Afro-Cuban influences precisely at the time when R&B was first forming. Dave Bartholomew and Professor Longhair, Henry Roland Bird, incorporated Afro-Cuban instruments, as well as the clave pattern and related two-celled figures in songs such as Carnival Day, Bartholomew 1949, and Mardi Gras in New Orleans, Longhair 1949. Robert Palmer reports that In the 1940s, Professor Longhair listened to and played with musicians from the islands and fell under the spell of Perez Prado's mambo records. Professor Longhair's particular style was known locally as rumba boogie. Haitian compas musicians such as Robert Martineau, Michel Covington, Henri Celestin, Dadou Pasquet, Jean-Claude Jean also contributed to the development of funk music in the 50s and 60s. Hip-hop is the most recent musical genre that exemplifies the diversity of African American music. Hip-hop, as a cultural movement, developed across the United States multi-regionally. Historically speaking, the style of using poetry over a beat can be seen in pre-colonial African cultures, particularly among the griots and oral historians of the continent. This method of rapping is found throughout the African diaspora. An intermingling of Afro-Mexican, Afro-Belizean, Afro-Caribbean, and African-American communities in Sacramento, the Bay Area, and LA laid the foundation for West Coast hip-hop in the 1960s. The culmination of these styles can be observed among the Watts Prophets, Amde Hamilton, Richard Dedeaux, Otis O'Solomon. On the East Coast, the intermingling of Afro-Caribbean and African-American musical traditions also produced a unique style. Some of these artists involved were King Charles, Curtis Blow, DJ Kool Herc, Grandmaster Flowers, Afrika Bambaataa, Count Machuki, King Stit, U-Roy, Jazzy J. It's widely believed that 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the Bronx was the birthplace of the hip-hop genre, and it all began with DJ Kool Herc. On August 11, 1973, his sister Cindy Campbell requested he spin some records at her back-to-school jam at the 1520 Community Center. He once told NPR in an interview, "There, the Jamaican-born DJ first tried out his merry-go-round DJing style on the turntables, extending an instrumental break to let people dance, breakdancing, longer, and began MCing, rapping, during the extended groove." While this infamous party has its place in hip-hop history, the roots of rap extend back much further, spanning the Atlantic. Dating back to the 13th century, storytellers called griots existed in West African kingdoms and empires. Historically, griots have been highly skilled orators, poets, musicians, praise singers, and satirists who traveled around reciting the history of the empire with rhythm and repetition. This widely recognized oral tradition, some argue, could be considered the earliest manifestation of rap, laying the groundwork for the development of hip-hop. Rap is fundamentally based on vocal styling, based on call and response, which is the foundation of all black music, said Obi Asika, a Nigerian entrepreneur and record executive who was instrumental in growing the country's music industry. Call and response, where one phrase answers another, either vocally or instrumentally, was popularized through artists such as James Brown, himself inspired by gospel music. It was brought to the forefront of hip-hop in the history-making 1980 Curtis Blow track, The Breaks, with a foundation that can be found throughout African history. Ojin music from the Igbo people is at least 1,000 years old. It's call and response. If you listen to the Orikis in Yoruba with a priest singing, it's call and response. If you listen to the foundations of Fuji from the Yoruba people, it's hip-hop, Asika reflected, citing various music styles of different Nigerian ethnic groups. Music is a ritual for us in Africa. It's not just entertainment, he added. Music is embedded in the form and function of African society from day one because it is also tied to the metronome of our hearts. 5 years before the party on Sedgwick Avenue, a group called The Last Poets provided the first known glimpse of Africa's influence on Western hip-hop culture during the American Civil Rights Movement. The group of activists, poets, and musicians, often credited among hip-hop architects, gathered in what is now Harlem's Mount Morris Park on May 19, 1968. what would have been the 43rd birthday of assassinated civil rights leader Malcolm X, and recited their first poems in public. By 1970, they released a self-titled album of recited poetry, amplifying Black power to the beat of a conga drum. The group's vocal style also includes aspects of call and response and rhythmic chanting based in African culture. Even the name, The Last Poets, was inspired by words from the continent, with a poem called Towards a Walk in the Sun by revolutionary South African poet Keorapetse Gositsile. In the poem, Gositsile depicts a time when poetry would have to be set aside in the face of the revolution. The group's body of work has since been sampled or referenced by the likes of Common, Too Short, NWA, A Tribe Called Quest, and the Notorious B.I.G. Founding Last Poets member Abiodun Oyewole actually filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against the artist's estate, which was dismissed in 2018 and deemed fair use. The spoken word element, dating back centuries to the griots, and then evolving to include musicians, poets, and rappers, has played a crucial role in preserving oral history and cultural richness. Asika agrees that without the African blueprint, aspects of rap in hip-hop culture would cease to exist. The music that the Black Americans have generated is music coming from their original source as Africans, which they have now reinterpreted because of the environment they are in, said Asika. All Black music, including hip-hop, comes from us. The global notoriety of hip-hop began with the Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight in 1979. Everybody heard that record, recalled Asika. At the time, rap was referred to as electro-funk, and Rapper's Delight was the first to be played on the radio. We were really consumed by American hip-hop rap music, said Ayo Animashon, founder of Hip Hop World Magazine and executive producer of the Headies Awards, which celebrate Nigerian music. We lived the culture, not by location, but by association, Animashon added. Asika agrees this sparked a cultural shift on the African continent, leading fans to embrace the 5 elements of hip-hop: MCing, DJing, breaking, graffiti, and beatboxing. Those 5 things, that's hip-hop. That's how the culture came alive, he said. Like in America, the DJ was the first to put rap on the map in Africa. Ron Ekundayo seems to have had the first record that was maybe recognized beyond Africa, said Asika, of the continent's earliest hip-hop offerings. Nigerian disc jockey Ron Ekundayo, aka DJ Ronnie, released The Way I Feel in 1981. Considered Nigeria's first rap album, it predates the mid-1980s to mid-1990s, when the genre really began to dominate mainstream music. DJ Ronnie's pioneering album led the way for the powerhouse Nigerian duo Okechukwu Azike and Pretty Okafor, better known as Junior and Pretty. They were actually rapping, they were preaching, they were telling stories with their rap, said Animashon. Junior and Pretty were among the first Nigerians to commercially release rap music. I believe they are the foundation of Nigerian hip-hop and the foundation of Afrobeats, said Asika, who signed the duo in 1992 to Storm Records and released their first Pidgin album. At a time when most artists were copying American hip-hop culture, the duo stood out, bridging local dialects with English, which was considered unique at the time. Their music is the foundation of everything everybody has done since then, Asika added. Hip-hop started to become dominant and take over. And then the transition is that when we fully domesticated hip-hop, it became Afrobeats. Meanwhile, the 1980s in South Africa brought Senyaka Kekana, known professionally as just Senyaka. The late rapper, who is recognized as one of the country's earliest hip-hop acts, released his debut album called Fukuza Dance in 1987. With hit singles including Go Away, the rapper experimented with fusing music genres like house and pop music, splicing in his own humorous and sometimes controversial lyrics. Senyaka's signature style also laid the foundation for the subgenre of Kwaito, a house music variant featuring African sounds and samples. Against the backdrop of Nigeria and South Africa's hip-hop evolution, the Senegalese rap scene was bubbling up. By the late 80s, hip-hop influence reached the French-speaking country in West Africa. Senegal is a huge hip-hop hub, said Leslie Lee Kasumba, an African music curator out of Uganda. While Eric B. and Rakim were changing rap's flow in America with their album Paid in Full, Senegal had a dynamic duo of their own developing with positive black soul. The Dakar-based duo featuring DJ Awadi and Dagi T became the country's first well-known hip-hop group. The group was founded in 1989 and flowed in English, French, and Wolof. Mirroring American artists like Public Enemy, the duo was pro-black and their lyrics focused on African pride. Outside of being great rappers and everything, they were also involved in the community, said Kasumba. By the mid-1990s, conscious rap was seeing an uptick in popularity worldwide. Beyond the good times and party vibes were lyrics that raised awareness of community social turmoil. In 1993, the Tanzanian group Kwanza Unit was another early adopter of the trend. Kwanza Unit was a hip-hop collective similar to Wu-Tang Clan, which formed in the US the year before. The group operated as a community, bringing together artists and fans to establish their own culture and way of life. Like Public Enemy did for the US, the group's lyrics addressed racism, classism, police brutality, and other social issues faced by the people in Tanzania. But the delivery was in Swahili. And what Osmic Menue remembered from his time as a young child in apartheid South Africa was emerging, particularly in Cape Town, with deep roots in hip-hop protest music. The long-term inequities faced by many black people there inspired artists to use music as a way of speaking out against hardships in South Africa. Prophets of Dar City was the first known hip-hop crew on the scene reflecting this approach. Groups like Prophets of the City were super vocal about being community activists, and they were quite politically driven, said Fiona Okumu, Spotify's head of sub-Saharan music, a group charged with elevating African acts. Okumu, who worked as a journalist in South Africa during the early stages of hip-hop, cites Prophets of the City as one of the most influential acts of its time. They reminded people of similar groups in the US like Public Enemy, groups like this who were very militant and quite concerned about the human condition, said Okumu. They rapped often about what was happening in their immediate reality being from the Cape Flats, she added. And that was really what the start of grassroots hip-hop in Cape Town. On the shoulders of these giants, African artists began to see more widespread commercial success at the turn of the century. In Nigeria, the name that comes up the most is Mode 9. It was real hip-hop, the artist told CNN of the music of the era. Born in England as Banatunde Olusegun Adewale, Mode 9, or Mode 9, is a DJ turned rap star who started out as a presenter for Rhythm 84.7 FM in Abuja, Nigeria. He made his musical debut in 2004 with his album Malcolm 9. The 9-time Headies Award winner, including 7 for Lyricist on the Roll, is known for his wordplay, but even the trendsetter has US hip-hop influences of his own. When I listened to American rapper Big Daddy Kane, everything changed, Mode 9 said. He inspired me to just be who I am, to not be afraid to add that to my hip-hop. For most aspiring African rappers in those earlier years, the key to success was mastering the art of American hip-hop swagger. It's not where you're from, it's where you're at, a hip-hop state of mind, Mode 9 said. He recalls wearing head warmers, Champion hoodies, and Timberland boots to embody hip-hop swag, even though temperatures in Lagos didn't usually cooperate. We didn't give a damn whether it was hot or not. You would see us sweating, wearing our head warmers, trying to look hip-hop, he said. A lasting fashion movement came hand in hand with hip-hop's mainstream popularity. Early on, American artists often rapped about clothing brands they wore. Graffiti artists went from tagging to airbrushing outfits, while breakdancers were creating their own signature sense of styles. The dress code was straight out of a Source magazine, explained Mode 9, referencing the US-based publication, which is the world's longest-running rap periodical. How American hip-hop influenced this African rapper's style. What was hot in America was definitely hot in Nigeria, he added. I'm wearing Adidas, that's purely because of hip-hop, agreed Mano. But subconsciously, the reason you chose to go buy that shoe is purely because there was a group called Run DMC that made it popular and that made it look cool. While both Asika and Manoe agree, rap music has undoubtedly influenced various global music scenes for the last half-century, including across Africa. Its origins lie in African cultural expressions, reciprocating the influence. I don't want it to look like Africans are trying to appropriate something that our cousins created, said Asika. I think in Africa, hip-hop is maybe 1,000 years old. So, with us, music is deeper than just some ephemeral thing. It's fundamental. With the skyrocketing global popularity of Afrobeats, African acts have recently been dominating the music landscape, but more needs to be done to document the history of hip-hop and its evolution on the continent. That's why Manoe is so passionate about teaching and preserving Africa's hip-hop history, and his driving purpose for establishing the museum in South Africa. The museum enshrines artifacts and includes a wall of fame, which pays tribute to those who laid the foundation for today's hip-hop. We want to show the world what Africa's about, said Manoe. This hip-hop is what we are about, and this is what we've been about. CNN's Earl Nurse, Kaito Au, Aneta Felix and Gertrude Kitongo contributed to this report.